Hi everyone. Right now we have you on mute, but at the end of the conference here, we'll unmute you, and if you have any questions for Jerry. But real excited. I really appreciate y'all spending an hour with us today. I'm super excited. Jerry is one of the, as far as the people walking the earth, he has probably one of the best sales minds out there. And I've received a bunch of responses when I invited out for this webinar, and I wish I had at least one person in the world like me as much as they like Jerry, because it was just off the hook how much he's adored, and just a legend in the sales world. And so I can guarantee you we're gonna have some fun today. He's gonna teach us some insights. And Emily, can you go to the next slide there? Perfect. So a little bit about us real quick. Relentless Recruiting. We actually turned 4 years old this month. Started with myself. For those who don't know me, I'm the guy in the middle. Some people accuse me of looking like Bradley Cooper, and I get that a lot. And so it also brought a couple of my recruiters to the right of that picture, Sharon Rhodes, and behind me to the left is Barry Rogers. And we're all sales leaders together at some pretty elite companies, high growth companies. Sharon and I were at LifeSell together. They got bought out 3 times. Now it's AppD. And then Barry Rogers was at Medtronic for a couple decades, and he and I worked at Zoll together. And it's been just a great ride so far. Great minds think alike when it comes to talent. And our business, we solve talent issues. That's how we're in business. That's why we're growing. And now we're one of the largest medical recruiter firms in the United States. And I kind of want people to really tap into us. We're more like consultants. We have hosted training for some startup companies, actually go in-house and train the new hires, because we were all sales leaders at one time. And then we help with compensation plans. We'll just go in and even help with the recruiting aspect, their internal recruiters. We work with a lot of small startup companies, rare disease, device, and genomic testing. So if you ever have a question and you need to find an answer, just call us. We're happy to help you. And next slide, Emily. So, being former sales leaders and being recruiters, we're trying to basically solve some problems that we see on our end that we didn't see when we're sales leaders. They're just a different view. And really, there's some what I call silent gatekeepers that's helping the business prevention department, and that's not sometimes not even a human being, just a process. And at the end of the day, it could really affect the company's talent pool. And the other thing is sales miss. We work with a few universities here in Texas, actually the largest one and the third largest one, and we work with their business departments, and they mentioned that they have a hard time helping graduates go into sales. So that they don't have a path because they don't offer a degree. So it's an unregulated profession. And so I started thinking about it, and I shot out a survey to a bunch of sales leaders, which we'll talk about a little bit. I'll ask Jerry his opinion. And we're really trying to figure out, since it's kind of an unregulated profession. And next slide, Emily. Sales is an unregulated profession. We're kind of teaching ourselves. And so Barry, Sharon, and I, my team, we just thought, how can we provide some value to our customers? And we thought about just bringing in Jerry. So we're investing in hopefully everybody's success. We're kind of the upstream. We help sales leaders find talent, and then Jerry helps them maximize the talent on his end. So I think we're kind of covering both sides of the fence here. So next slide, Emily. Okay, so actually I missed Jerry live when I worked at Zoll, and Barry actually was there, and I just figured I'll let Barry kind of introduce Jerry and kind of give his insight about Jerry's performance in person.
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, so in my 30+ years of sales and sales management, I've had the pleasure and often the pain of sitting through more training sessions than I can remember or count. But when I was at Zoll, Zoll hired Jerry and his team at Delta Point to come in and really do a very thorough training engagement with us. And I had taught training classes. I've seen lots of training, but it didn't take me long to figure out that Jerry was the best I'd ever seen. And so I left that training and reinforced those practical and easy to apply concepts for years with my salespeople. And Jerry, you'll be glad to hear that today I'm still asking what I want to know. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to Kelly and you.
Yeah, Jerry, and really what I'm curious, because I follow you a lot, and really I think the people who don't know you, I'm kind of trying to explain how many years you've been a student of sales, and really how did you get to be such a great mind in sales?
Well, my first sales job was with Lipton Tea, and I got fired after 3 months because I ran out of family and friends. And and then I went to work for, I worked for Mutual New York, and then I went to work for Lipton Tea. I worked for them for 9 months as a salesman, and I quit because I'm basically an introvert. And I couldn't get out of the car and call on customers. So my life dream was to be a college coach. And I got an opportunity to coach at Northeast Louisiana University as a quarterbacks coach, but I got rejected from graduate school because I was not a very good student while I was in college. And so I had to get a job, and I got a job in the pharmaceutical business. And I thought it was PR. But my boss very quickly convinced me that I was selling stuff. But he gave me some great advice. He said, all you got to do is be yourself. Just be your authentic self. You're a hard worker. You're a smart guy. You engage people well. You'll do fine. And frankly, the first 6 years I was in the business as a rep, I worked hard. I was in the top 50, but I did not know what I was doing. Other than, doing exactly what he told me to do. And so I got promoted to manager in 1981. And I remember I took over the last district in the country out of 70. And I remember driving down the road one day saying this to myself: you now have to teach 10 people how to sell, and you don't know how to do it. You know how to sell, but you don't know how to teach somebody how to sell. So I went to the bookstore in Birmingham, and I bought a book called Winning Strategies in Selling by Roger Staubach and Jack and Gary Kinder. And the only reason I bought it because Staubach was a football player, and I was too. And so, but it changed my life. It's not a great book. My book's better, but he had a quote in there that changed my life. He said, chances are you'll be the same person 5 years from today that you are today, with the exception of two things: the people you meet and the books you read. The person who won't read truly no better off than the person who can't read. And so I remember reading that saying, okay, I've been out of college 10 years. I've read 3 books. I read Jaws. I read QB7 by Leon Uris, and I read The Godfather in anticipation of moving to New Jersey. And that's when I started reading. And since then, I've read 595 business books. I've read one book 93 times. I've written 4 best-selling books. I would say that everything and that quote was by a guy named Charlie Tremendous Jones. Everything he said was true. I learned from some of the greatest salespeople in the world, and they were people who worked for me, and they were people who I worked for. So there's the people aspect of it, and then there's the seeking ideas from others aspect of it, which today's easier than ever. Because you don't have to read books. I mean, I do 100 book summaries a year. I use a service called readitfor.me, which I actually own 2.5% of because I love it so much. That you can do a book summary of the best books in the world, business books, in 12 minutes. So I do 2 a week, so it's 25 minutes a week, and I wind up buying about 5% of them. I also read 25 books a year, and then I listen to other people, like I listen to Jeremy Miner I listen to Troy Cosgordon. I listen to Scott Moldenhauer. I listen to Hogadu. I listen to Paul Cherry. And so I'm just constantly learning. So I just believe that, I woke up one day, and after all of this sort of information got, cataloged in my brain, and I began to develop my own ideas about, how do you get buy-in from customers? I mean, I remember reading Jeffrey Gitomer's book, The Little Red Book of Sales Answers, which for my money is his best book. And in it he says people hate to be sold, but they love to buy. And I thought to myself, my gosh, why do we teach people how to sell? Why don't we teach people how to buy in? And so that's what made me write the book, Stop Acting Like a Seller, Start Thinking Like a Buyer. And so we've trained, 35, 40,000 pharmaceutical salespeople, medical salespeople on selling. If you go to work for some of the bigger companies, you'll see my video of me talking about their selling approach, which we will have helped them create. And they're all different. But the truth is, there's only 8 things that really matter in a sales call. And if you can figure out how to be good at those 8, you'll probably be pretty good. So and then the next thing you know, somebody sends me a thing saying I'm one of the 50 best salespeople of all time, which the very next day I wrote a blog saying I know 50 people better than me. But I put it on my website, I will tell you that. And then, I've been in the top 10 sales experts in the world by globalgurus.org. In fact, they're voting again. If you go to my LinkedIn page, and it'll tell you how to vote. So if you want to vote for me, you can move me up from 3rd. I'd like to be higher, but it's funny. When last year, I was number 9. I was number 5, and then number 9, and then this year number 3. I called my son, who's 20, and I said, "Hey, son, your old man got a promotion." He said, "Well, you can't get a promotion, Dad. You own the company." I said, "No. I'm talking about I was the number 9 sales expert in the world. Now I'm number 3." He said, "So you're telling me 6 people died?" And so I'm not taken too seriously at home. But I would say, the way I became one of the top sales experts in the world is basically being really good at what I do because I learned and I never stop learning. And because I have a huge, powerful network, which is one of the reasons why I've written 3 books on that, The Relationship Edge in Business, and they're fundamentally the same, but the newest one has the latest content. And then I actually created an app called Really Linked, who you really want to be linked to. I mean, on my LinkedIn, I have over 14,000 followers. If you ask me how many of those 14,000 are crucial to my business success, the answer is 102. Now, my question is, how do I stay in meaningful touch with those 102? And so I've done that. I can tell you that my business, which is probably done, I'd say this is our 19th year, we've probably done $90 million in revenue, 17 of the top 100 companies in the world. I can tell you that I can trace 75% of my business to 2 people.
Wow.
So that your network is incredibly important, and most people are not very good at building a network. And this is one of the reasons why if I run into college kid or a college kid sends me an email and asks me for my book, I send it to any college kid in America that wants it for free. I teach twice a year at Northern Illinois University. I taught Monday for 2 hours. And I don't charge. I give the books for free because I think this is something that if you have kids in college, they ain't going to learn in college. I mentor 4 Division I basketball coaches in basketball. And my main purpose is to teach the coaches leadership, to teach coaches how to recruit, but also to teach these young men who are not going to make a living with basketball the rest of their life. How do they build a network and start building a network when they're young so they can be successful? So I guess that's a long-winded answer to how I became number 3. Now, the next question is, y'all got to get me to number 2 at least, for God's sake.
All right, we can do it. And so before we move forward, to Sharon never met you before, or I don't think she really followed you. So Sharon, do you think Jerry's an expert?
Sounds like it.
Yep, I think we're good. So we're gonna get going here,
like
Jerry. It. Yeah, so we got you established there. For the folks that might not know who you are, I think your life's work. I think we have the right guy on this call. So what this is, and I let Jerry take a peek at this. This is a question on a survey that I sent out to 60 sales leaders. And basically the gist of it is, if you have 10 sales reps on your team, how many of them are true superstars? And so the average, the answer is 3. And so I asked Jerry what his thoughts were. And Jerry, would you that surprise you, or about right, or do you have any other thoughts about that?
Well, my experience tells me it's about right, but it's not what should be right, which is a very different, but more, I think, more important question. I think the average manager, and I was a manager for 8 years, first line manager, and I mean, I'm a manager now. I've got employees, but we had 70 districts when I was in the business as a manager. I was a manager for 8 years. The 8 years I was a manager, I had the number 1 district out of 70, 7 years. And the year I wasn't number 1, I was number 2. I hired 20 people in 8 years, half of them from an agency I trusted, because when they trusted, they knew exactly what I was looking for. And half of them I got one from an ad in a newspaper, and the rest of them I got from referrals from my own people, because my own people knew what I was looking for. But of those 20 people, 19 of the 20 were in the top 50 in the company within 2 years. Now I call those A players, because we had 650 reps. The only one that wasn't, I fired after 3 weeks. So if you stayed with me longer than a month, you were guaranteed to be in the top 8% of the company. Now, within 3 years, 7 of those 20 people were the sales rep of the year for the entire company. And 13 of those 20 people that I hired got promoted. So I think the problem is the mindset of many managers is you can't manage a team of superstars. And I think you're right if you don't hire them. Now, how you find them is a completely different issue. One of the reasons why I was so drawn to recruiters was because when I found the recruiter, and I only found one that really every single time brought me exactly what I was looking for, then I was more than happy to bring that person on. And I can tell you the number of people that person brought to me that weren't qualified was 0. And I didn't hire everybody that he brought, but he brought me lots of great talent. And the ones that I did hire, which were about 10 of them, were superstars. And then the other 9 that I hired, one of them was a dud, and I fired him after 3 weeks, and the other 9 were superstars. Now, the problem with managing a team of superstars, especially in a company that has limited intellect, which ours did, I got the same bonus pool at number 1 as the team that was number 70. So I had to figure out a way as their leader to make people that were in the top 50 in the company getting paid the same as someone who was number 600. And that is a bit of a trick. And maybe that's one of the reasons why people don't resolve that they're going to have a team of superstars. But I knew when I took this job that I wanted to hire people who would be wildly successful. And I knew 3 wasn't enough.
Gotcha. Well, and as you see, there's some folks over that took this, that have 10 out of 10. So, gosh, I hope that's some of our clients that have that kind of result. But we, being former sales leaders, we know the pain of working out a poor hire and how expensive it is. And I try to explain to sales leaders, we're like a caddy is to a golfer. You should have one caddy at a time, and that caddy better give you the best advice. And that caddy would be nice if that caddy could have played golf before too. And I think that's the results we're getting, is why we're growing so much, is because we get it and we sit there and we really make sure it's good for the candidate too. A lot of times candidates are a little confused about the overall duties of a company, and so we're really an agent for both sides of the fence. But the only time it's profitable for everybody when it works out. And so a lot of sales leaders are asking us, what do we see on our end to predict a superstar? And that's what I was this is the next slide. Out of 5, everything's important, by the way, but out of these 5 attributes of their superstars, what is the leading attribute? And so they said that strong drive and the will to be successful was far the number 1 attribute of their superstars. And then the second one is critical thinking skills, an ability to build relationships, selling clinically. And the last is really where they came from, the training and so forth. And that's a question that I'm really curious what your thoughts are, Jerry.
Well, I can only speak from my business now, which is, consulting with big pharma. Everybody I hire has rich experience because our average employee's making, high 6 figures. And I say high 6 figures, over 150. We have to start them at 150 and then, they have to give them incentives on top of that. And then we have people that are making, several times that. So you can't, you have to have people. Our model is not to go hire somebody from Harvard or Yale or Dartmouth or, the Colgate Darden School. We have to have people who have real experience. So, but when I led a sales team, I had a completely different point of view. Now, I still think that the experience for us is important, but what's more important is the first thing. Now, what we do in order to determine whether they have strong drive and the will to be successful is we do 2 things. One is we still use an agency. In fact, we hired somebody Monday who came from an agency, and it's an agency who has this is the first time we've used them, but I will use them again. In fact, I've already given them another assignment. Because I think the agencies can find out things we can't find out. And I think if you have a close relationship with an agency, you can probably get better candidates and save you more time. Now, when I was running my district, I only hired 1 person with pharma experience because I didn't believe in it. My bias was I don't want somebody's, because most people who've got pharma experience, this is Jerry's view of the world. Now, medical sales is different. And I think you need, healthcare experience if you're going to be in medical sales. I think that's different. But if you're in pharma, I don't want somebody, who's either job hopping or who's coming to work for me because they're not very good where they are, and I don't want their bad habits. I want to get them fresh, and I want to teach them. I hired a 4th grade math teacher. I hired a woman who was had not worked in 10 years and was re-entering the workforce, had been a housewife and mother to 2 children. And I look for that strong drive and the will to be successful. Now, what I look for now, which is in the same category, is I look for people who have good communication skills, because if you don't have good communication skills, you're not selling much of anything. The second thing is I look for a sense of urgency. In our business, if you don't have a sense of urgency, you're not going to be successful. And so if I look at your DISC executive, when we do a DISC executive test, if your competitiveness isn't in the 90th percentile, I won't consider you. Now, I can do that because I don't work for a big company, and big companies shy away from that. But if I were interviewing, I'd tell my recruiter, or I'd sure as heck figure out what questions do I ask in an interview that can demonstrate to me that this person has a huge sense of urgency. And secondly, I want them to have a 90th percentile in competitiveness, because selling is about the most competitive game there is, especially in today's environment, where there's more noise, there's more people, there's more products. Products, especially in medical device, become antiquated faster than they've ever become antiquated before. The same thing's true in pharma. So I look for those things. I do like people that are good at building relationships. And if I'm hiring somebody to do business development for my company, which would be one of our senior people, then they need to come with relationships, because if they don't have relationships, the likelihood that somebody's going to want to see them is not very good. So I think that number 1 will always be number 1. Now, Ron Willingham wrote a great book called The Inner Game of Selling. And in there, he talks about, what it takes to sort of have congruence. And one of the things that he says is that the force multiplier of someone's success is their achievement drive. And that's essentially what you're describing in a strong drive and the will to be successful. It's achievement drive. And so achievement drive is a multiplier of all these other things. You show me somebody with achievement drive who's smart, who has good communication skills, and is coachable, and I'll show you an A player.
Gotcha. Well, that's one thing when I was a sales leader. All these are important, right? But I used to hand over a clinical to a candidate, and then they would do a little role play just to see their clinical selling ability. And sometimes they would do okay or below okay, right? And looking back, I'm not sure if I really ever flushed out their will to be successful in their drive-in interview, but I cut them right when their clinical selling role play on a product that they haven't been trained yet. Had an itchy trigger finger for those. Hindsight, looking back, I probably should have, checked these pillars before I got rid of somebody, because that's something that, clinical selling over time and the right will and drive, they can definitely pick it up.
The first two people I hired, and I hired them, one was a referral and one was off an ad. This is where I learned how do you hire a superstar every time. I was ready. This was 1981. I was ready to hire a woman who worked for more business forums on commission. She was a rock star, and I was ready to hire her. And my wife calls me on the phone and says, "Hey, I want you to interview this guy. He's called here 10 times." I'm saying, well, first place, he sounds like a pest. But I'll interview him. Well, I had seen his resume. I had 200 resumes. And I remember him because his last name was Fuqua, F-U-Q-U-A. And my next door neighbor growing up in Memphis was named Fuqua. And so I wondered if this was a person who was related. So I looked at his resume closely and I rated it C. A was I got a C. A B is all the A's fall out. Maybe I'll go to the B pile, which I never did. And C. His was a C. And he calls me on the phone and I'm going to blow him off. And I said to him, well, look, I got your resume, but honestly, I'm just looking for somebody with more experience. And he said to me, well, look, I know I'm only 23 years old, and I know you're looking for somebody with more experience, but I have to tell you, I have the experience of any 30-year-old you've ever met. And let me tell you why. And so he gives me this litany of reasons why he's had more experience than the average 30-year-old. And then his final question to me was, don't you think I at least deserve an interview? Now, I could not say no to that. So I said yes to him. And so he shows up the next day, and I'm saying to myself, I'm just going to be nice, and I'm ultimately going to blow this guy away. So I sit there and listen, and I kept playing this tape in my head that one of my mentors taught me, and he told me two things. Number one, if you hire a dud and train them, you got to train dud. Number two, he used to say, don't judge a book by its cover. Judge a person by the content of their character and what you believe to be their capability for success, and don't image hire. So I'm sitting there saying, okay, this guy looks way different than me. He was probably 75 pounds overweight, had a wimpy handshake, but I listened to him and I loved him. So then then I decided to hire the woman, but I hadn't made the offer. And so it was a Friday night. I called him. He was working at a drugstore, and he had two jobs. It paid his own way through high school, own way through college. And I called him and told him I wasn't going to hire him. And he said, well, I really feel terrible about that, but I'd like for you to keep me in the queue. And I said, okay. The very next day, this was a Friday night. Now this is 1981. We ain't got no email. The very next day, I get 5 letters in my mailbox at 1 o'clock. One is from the president of Auburn University. Now, I went to school with 1,200 people. The president would not write a letter about me. The doctor, who would be his biggest target, the owner of the chain drugstore, which is the largest independent chain in that town, the vice president of the largest dairy in Alabama, and the governor. And all of them fundamentally said the same thing to me. You are a functional moron if you don't hire this guy. This is the most unusual person I've ever met. So I hire him. And my boss lets me hire him, even though when I tested him, we had a test back then called Squires or Fail, he flunked the test. And I call my boss, and my boss says, we don't hire any people who score like your guy did. And I said, well, the test is wrong. Well, how many people have you hired? I said, well, I haven't hired anybody, but I'm telling you that test is wrong. And so to give him a lot of credit, he let me hire him. I go work with him after he comes back from training. He flunks the final exam. And I call the training department, and they say, well, the guy, he's working really hard. He just ain't that smart. And I said, well, as long as he's working hard, it's all I care about. So he comes back. I go work with him. The very first call we make, we come out, he says, and I make the call. He says, I can't do that. I said, what are you talking about? He said, I can't do what you just did. I said, look, why not? He said, well, it's not my style. And I said, well, first place, pal, you ain't got no style. That's why I'm here. I'm here to give you style. And he said, okay. So the next call, I made it. He kept, and every time he'd walk out of a call, he'd say, I can't do that. It's not my style. I listened to that for 3 consecutive days. He never made a call. So at the end of the third day, I said to him, I said, look, it never in my mind did I contemplate I would hire someone who was so ridiculously hard to deal with in you. And I said, I'm going home. I'm not staying here another minute. And I don't want to hear a word from you until next Friday. Now, I'm thinking by next Friday, I will have figured out a way to fire him without my boss thinking that I was a moron. And so he said, well, what do you want me to do while I'm gone? And I said, well, we just launched this product, and you got 26 hospitals. Why don't you go see if you can get the product stocked? Now, I was leading the nation. The product had only been out 3 months. I was leading the nation in sales, and my average rep was doing $5,000 a month. $5,000 a month. He calls me the next Friday, 8 days later, and he says, what do you want me to do with these orders? I said, well, what orders are you talking about? He said, well, you told me to get these orders. I said, well, how much is it? He said, $26,000. I said, I like your style. I said,
nice.
but let me tell you what I learned from that. I learned 2 things from that experience. One, I never hired anybody that someone didn't tell me I was crazy if I didn't. Now, sometimes the person who told me that I was crazy if I didn't was a person who I was turning down. And I turned down 3 people out of 1,000 people I interviewed. I hired 20, which means I said no to 980. And only 3 people called me back and told me I'd made a mistake. And I hired every one of them. I interviewed them again, but I said, if you got the guts to call me and tell me I made a mistake, I got to look at you again. Because what do I want? I want somebody who won't take no for an answer. I want somebody who's persistent, and I want somebody who believes in themselves. But what I learned was, if I didn't hear, and I remember the second person I hired, the only job he'd been a buyer for J.C. Penney's. He'd been out of Alabama, University of Alabama for 3 years. And I said, well, look, I'm not hiring you unless you give me the name of somebody that you've worked for. So he gave me the campus police at the University of Alabama. And when I called the campus police and asked them, I said, look, I'm calling it for reference. He said, do you have any idea how many people work for me? And I said, no, sir, I don't. He said, well, let me just make it clear. I don't know who you're going to ask me about, but the likelihood that I'm going to know him is not very good. So I said, well, it's Chris Free. He said, Chris Free? He's the only one I do remember. I said, what do you remember? He said, I can tell you. He said, that kid at 22 was better than anybody that I had that was 30 years old here. He said, if I could have promoted that guy and made him a manager, I would have. If you have a chance to hire this guy and don't, you're dumb. So I hired him. 2 years later, he's #1 sales rep in the country. Now, at the first district meeting that my manager came to, he told me I had to fire him because he couldn't say Pseudomonas aeruginosa. And I said, for my gosh, Gene, the guy works 100 hours a week. I can teach him how to say Pseudomonas aeruginosa. And again, within 2 years, he was #1 rep in the country. So I think you got to look for the inner game. One of my coaches is Buzz Williams at Texas A&M. And one of the things Buzz talks about is the invisible. The invisible is oftentimes way more important than what's visible. So what's visible is what's on their resume. What's visible is what you hear in the interview. What's invisible is all of these things that are inside them that determine whether they have this strong drive and this will to be successful. My experience tells me, this is just my experience, that a great recruiter does that. And if you can find one, that really knows what you're looking for, they have a better chance of getting that out of the person than maybe your interviewing process does, in my experience.
Well, of course, because they're on their best behavior, right? When they're interviewing, and there hasn't been a manager yet that hired somebody that ended up having to force somebody out of a company because they had a poor interview. Usually, some of the worst hires I've ever made were best interviewers, and so and that's a good point that you bring up. Is you always should ask for references, especially managers that know them before. And then on the flip side, if you're a candidate looking to land a job, really make sure that you look at the show that you have strong drive and will and critical thinking skills. Because if you're talented and you're not just skilled, but you actually have talent, that'll be easy for you to do. And so it makes perfect sense. So Jerry, we're going to get into some of the myths here or truths. So these are some common questions that we get from other sales leaders. And the first one is basically the past experience. You kind of already covered this. Is that a predictor of their success? And you know, you kind of mentioned that you probably, if you're in pharmaceuticals, you probably wouldn't hire another pharmaceutical rep. But would you, if you're a medical device, would you look at a pharmaceutical rep background or vice versa?
I would, but I would look at how good they were at their job. I mean, if they weren't in the top, 2 or 3%, I wouldn't touch them, because those people are extraordinary. And look, I mean, I give recommendations today. I gave one this week to a big client of mine, probably the largest healthcare company in the world. That's a sales rep, and he's trying to be an account manager for this other company. And I told him, you're nuts if you don't hire this guy, because I believe in him. Now, I proactively give recommendations to people that I believe in, and people call me, and if I have a great relationship with them and I believe in them, I always tell them, tell me who you're interviewing with, and if I know somebody there, I'll call them for you. I just recently, I got contacted on LinkedIn by a woman who was Miss Iowa in 2008, and she's the first woman in the Miss USA pageant that has a disability, and she has cerebral palsy, and it only affects her. She got a mild case. It only affects the way she walks. But she was in medical sales. She was selling some hospital equipment or something, making 40-something grand a year, and she wanted to get in pharma. And she said, "Yeah, you're the guru for pharma. Could you help me get a job?" Now, I didn't know who this woman was, so I Googled her and found out. Okay, she'd been on Ellen DeGeneres. They did the documentary about her. She, the daughter of a pig farmer. Miss Iowa, competed in the Miss USA pageant. I mean, I don't need to hear much more than to know that first bucket that she's talking about, she's got it in spades. So, I recommended her for a job that was in pharma that she got. She got a $58,000 salary increase in a new car, and her car had 315,000 miles on it. Now, I will promise you that I did the company a gigantic favor, because this woman is a rock star. So I give recommendations, and I do believe that success is inside you. And so if you've had serious success before, I'm going to take a hard look at that. So I'm not going to discount it. I'm going to take a hard look at it. I'm going to make you explain to me why you're successful. Because if you are unconsciously competent, that's really hard to transfer from one industry to another. And I can tell you, I've hired in my business, people who were VPs of sales of sales forces with 10,000, and they couldn't sell, free water in the desert. And how the hell they wound up as VP of sales or something, I don't know. But it sure as heck because they didn't know anything about, because they knew something about, what a great salesperson looked like. So yep. I think the further away you get from the customer, the easier it is to be fooled.
There's a lot of truth in that. So truth or myth, here's another one. A seasoned rep, I see different industries, in rare disease companies, I see a lot more gray hair. Maybe in device, I don't see as much gray hair. And do you see there's is there a shelf life on somebody's sales ability?
I don't think there. I mean, if there is, I'm in trouble. I'm 71, and so I don't believe it. My old boss, the guy who changed my life in every way, said, "When you're green, you're growing. When you're ripe, you're rotting." And I think that for this, so one of the things that I would find out if I were interviewing somebody is, give me the names of the last 3 sales books you read. Now, if somebody came to me and said, Jerry Acuff's my mentor, and I didn't know who Jerry Acuff was, and I'd say, well, he's the number 3 sales expert in the world. Why don't you look him up? By the way, you want to call him? Here's his cell phone. We'll call him right now. I said, I can be a pretty good reference because of my experience. But if you're 65 years old and you can say that to somebody, then they ought to hire you. Yep. Because what you've got here is someone with obviously huge achievement drive, someone who's coachable because they got a mentor, and you've got somebody who has what I call a growth mindset. Now, Carol Dweck wrote the book Mindset, which made the delineation between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. And I will tell you, there's lots of seasoned sales reps that I encounter that have a growth mindset, and they are off the charts, and they're 55 or 60 years old or older. And there's also people that are 27 years old who have a fixed mindset and think they know it all, and I wouldn't give you 14 cents for them. And so I think one is you got to evaluate how serious are they at learning their craft. I mean, selling is. I'm 71 years old, and I've read all these books. I'm still learning. I printed out a blog today that one of my clients sent me. I can't wait to read again. And it's about how do you use no. See, everybody in the world that's in sales, we've got to get the yes. You got to get the yes. This person's perspective is no can oftentimes be a better answer if you ask the question the right way. And so I'm a big believer in that, questions are the real difference between huge success and failure in terms of the individual skill that it takes to be successful. And so what I can learn about questioning is hugely important. The other thing I want to do is, I tell salespeople, and I said, do never get intoxicated with a company. I don't give a damn if it's Johnson & Johnson, or I don't care if it's Google. You find out whether that supervisor has developed people and gotten them promoted. And if they haven't, then you do not want to work for them. You want to work for a boss, a leader, not a company, especially if you're young. Because I can promise you, when I went to training school in 1974, there were 29 people in my class, 2 nurses, 1 doctor, and a bunch of people with science degrees. And I have my little 2.18 GPA in English, and I was on academic probation every semester you could be on, except first and the last. First, they ain't figured out you're dumb, and the last one you couldn't be on and graduate. I finished number 1 in my class, but I can tell you in that class, there were 15 people who had more talent than I did, but they had lousy bosses. And I wound up running a company, and they wound up leaving to go to work for another company. Because the truth is, and this is the truth, and this is, what the guy wrote about in First Break All the Rules is, salespeople, people in general don't leave companies, they leave supervisors. And so I want to make sure if I'm the employee, that I'm asking the questions that prove to me that how are you going to develop me? What are you going to teach me? How are you going to make sure that I am really, really good at what I do? Talk to me about some of the people that you've gotten promoted. Talk to me about your mindset about people getting promoted after only being here for 2 or 3 years. That may not happen to me, but if it did happen to me, would you hold me back? Would you hold me back because you want me to stay here and be successful for you rather than you have an interest in my success? So I think it really depends on whether that person has a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. If they got a growth mindset and a track record, you cannot go wrong hiring them, and I don't care how old they are.
That's great information.
Me,
that's why as recruiters, we look at the last 3 or 4 years. That's where if that person has some President's Clubs and some accolades the last 2, 3, 4 years, they still have fire in the belly. But if their last award was in 2005, well, that's their own issue. So, all right, Emily, there we go. So, talking about job jumpers, I think you kind of mentioned a little bit like, earlier, um, is that a predictor, or is it something that you would want to know a little bit more about somebody's jumps before you did not interview them? Because we see that a lot where that person 3 jobs in 7 years, um, we don't want to interview.
Kelly, I think since I hired back in the 80s and in the early 90s, I think this has actually changed a lot. I think back then it was far more of a big deal than it is today, because number one, you got people that are laying people off, and they got, one of my clients just laid off 25% of their sales force. Well, I had to lay off 100 and something people when I was running my company. Of course, I wound up only, actually getting downsizing 25 because we knew this was coming for 2 years, and we just didn't hire vacancies because we didn't want to have to, terminate people in a layoff. But I hired some people that I hated to. I mean, I got rid of some people I hated to get rid of, and if they jumped jobs because of the company situation, that's different. So your thought about really delving into what did motivate these jobs. Now, I had one of the people I mentor, really, really, really sharp woman that I've known, I guess now for 3 or 4 years, and she calls me. She's been in this new job for like 8 or 9 months, and she's killing it. But she's got an opportunity to interview in the oncology business, and she's asking me, should I jump or should I stay? And I said, look, if it were me, I mean, first place, you're talking about 2 completely different companies. One is a sort of a startup company. The company that you're going to is well established, and has great name, is an icon. It's iconic in oncology. If it were me, I'd interview, and then I'd make the decision, see what the offer is, et cetera. I don't think anybody's going to hold it against you because you have an opportunity to improve yourself. And sure enough, she called me last Wednesday night and said she got the job and she's going to take it. But she was hesitating because she thought that the job jumping would look bad. I said, I don't think it looks bad anymore, but I think people have to delve into it to understand why you actually made that switch. And if the rationale is good and you can validate it, then it doesn't bother me.
Gotcha. I got a little story on that. We were sales leaders together. He jumped and started a different company, started a whole new sales division. And what's great about knowing your customer is they give you a chance, and you can make a living at recruiting. The bad thing is you really know each other maybe too well, and you let emotions get the best of you. So he was pushing back on a bunch of candidates, and so I went to LinkedIn, printed out a bunch of profiles of people that I knew he knew, and I marked through their names, highlighted so he couldn't see who these people were, and I sent 10 of them to him. I said, any of these people work? I don't want to call them because I just want to make sure I'm not wasting my time. He's like, 2 of them look okay, the rest, horrible. And then I told him who they were, and they were all A players at our former company. He goes, all right, send over who you want. I'll interview them. You've convinced me. So, all right, Emily, next slide, please. And I just, actually, I'm going to read a question real quick, and this is kind of one and the same. So, actually, this question was asked by several people. So, this sales leader says, my boss, the VP, passed on a candidate I really wanted to hire. How would you recommend I approach the conversation with my boss?
I'd tell him that, I would say, look, you got to tell me what your hesitation or reservation is here, because I got to tell you, I really believe in this person. And by the way, unless I'm wrong, I'm the person responsible for the quota. And so if I'm willing to take a chance on them, it'd be nice if you would let me do that. Now, the first person I hired, I had that conversation with the guy that I told you was the number 1 rep in the country within 2 years. He said to me, you can't hire this guy. This guy flunked the test. I said, Gene, the test is wrong. He said, Jerry, you never hired anybody. You don't know the test is wrong. I said, let me tell you what I do know. I know that this guy's got more drive and ambition than anybody I ever met. I know that I got 5 people, including the governor of Alabama, the president of Auburn University, telling me that I'm a nut if I don't hire him. And I got to tell you, I got to believe they're right. I got to believe they're right, and I'm not going to go against, and I'm going to go against that test. And what I'm asking you to do is to give me that latitude. And he said, all right, you're hired, you make the decision. Now, I will tell you, this man was probably the greatest leader I ever worked for. But one of the reasons why he was a great leader was he gave you enough of an opportunity to make your own decisions and your own mistakes. And he knew that this might be a mistake on my part. And he was fine if it was a mistake because he knew it would be a strong lesson. But he also knew that I was passionate about this person. And I was so passionate that as a brand new manager who had earned nothing, was willing to fight for this person. So I would say you got to fight for him.
Yep.
And then
right.
Look, sooner or later, you're not the person making the decision, somebody else is. But if you believe strongly in a person, I'm going to fight for them, and until they tell me, you got to shut the hell up. Because if I believe in them, I'm going to go to the mat for them.
All right. Well, let me read another question here, and this is another common question. So, what's your thoughts and tips of selling virtually, given what we're going through?
Well, we do a lot of business. I mean, as the number 3 sales expert in the world, I sort of took it upon myself when this started to say, if you're going to be one of the top sales experts in the world, you better figure this thing out. So I spent about a week studying selling in adversity and studying cold calling. And we developed 2 different WebExes, sort of one for, these are the things that you need to know to sort of begin. And we don't focus on the technical stuff. We focus on, how do you actually get an opportunity to talk to somebody? Because you see, what happens is virtual selling is really not virtual selling. What virtual selling is selling. But what's different is the contact and the access principles are the things that have changed dramatically. And so if you don't teach people how do you contact people and how do you access them, you're never going to get to the opportunity to actually have a conversation with them about your product. So what we teach people is how do you contact them and how do you access them and how do you position yourself as a resource to them during this troubled time. And if you'll do those things, of course, we obviously have, WebExes that we do on that. Then we also have one on how do you virtually coach people. And I will tell you, coaching virtually is not different. It's way different. And most people have not figured out how different it is, and they hadn't figured out how do you do it. We have. Now, the reality is, once you get people to actually connect with you, then there's still, in my mind, a protocol that you use that actually endears you to that person. And let me give you a simple example. The president of my company, who obviously works for me and is one of my partners and one of my mentors, I'll tell you, his sister's a doctor. She got furloughed. She's a family practitioner in Knoxville. She got furloughed, and the day after she got furloughed, she got 9 calls from drug reps. She told all nine of them that she was furloughed. And so, they all hung up. 3 weeks later, 3 of them called back. And of the 3 that called back, she told them again she was furloughed. 2 of them hung up immediately and never called her back. One person stayed on the phone, talked to her, expressed an interest in her, what she was going to do while she was furloughed, et cetera. Called her every 3 weeks for 9 weeks until she got hired again. Now, you tell me, which of those 9 people do you think she's talking to? She's only talking to the person who actually acted like they cared. And so what I try and get people to understand is that in this remote environment, whether you're on the phone or whether you're on the Zoom or whether you're doing a virtual lunch or whatever, you've got to make sure that the very first thing you do is you demonstrate your humanity and that you find out how are you and your loved ones doing in this crisis? Before we have any discussion about anything oriented towards business, I need to understand that. Because let me tell you something, that question in and of itself could abort your conversation. They could say, well, my sister just died from COVID yesterday, and I'm trying to get out of here, to catch a plane to go to New Orleans. Okay, I don't need them to hear any more to know now's not a good time. I'll call back in a couple of weeks. So what we try and get people to understand is position yourself as a resource, because once they understand that you have the ability to be a resource, you can then use the resources as the opportunity to talk about your product, because the resources are based on your product, or they're based on the issues or challenges that your clients are having. And so it's not a back door to getting in. But here's one of the things that I found. Too many of my clients don't know what resources they have. They're not aware of what the digital resources are, because the digital resources, the consumer resources, are different than the resources that they're getting for the field. And I'm saying, if you want to be great at this, and I would submit to you that when you look at the healthcare business, over 80% of people say that after the pandemic is over, I still believe that this hybrid environment is going to be something that I'm okay with. So I don't mind seeing you in person, but there's times that when I'm going to want to see you virtually. Well, if that's true, then we better be good, just as good at virtual selling as we are at in-person selling. And you can't do that if you don't understand the contact, the access model, if you don't understand, how to exercise humanity, how to exercise courtesy. How do you make it easy for them to say no? So if you could transfer me from the receptionist to the doctor, first question I'm going to ask is, hey, doc, how are you and your loved ones doing during the pandemic? Second question I'm going to ask is, okay, I know your time is important. Give me some idea about how long do you feel comfortable having a conversation with me right now? And whatever they say, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, etc. Now, here's what we know. In pharma, when you get a virtual interaction, it's actually 17 minutes, as opposed to 6 minutes when we were doing it virtually. Now, you're getting probably 50 to 60% fewer interactions, but the ones you're getting are longer. Now, what that also calls for is what I call precision planning. Because what we found early on is that people were getting 17 minutes and they had 5 minutes of stuff to say. And so then they look like a dog looking at a fan. And so what you have to prepare for is almost anything. That's why we call it precision preparation. So
Gotcha.
I think the key is to really understand the differences between in-person selling and selling remotely, understanding what impact the pandemic is having on the people that you're calling on, and finding out how has this impacted the way you work. I went to my doctor today for this echocardiogram. I checked in online. I walked in. They told me to go sit back and sit in my car. They'll come out and get me. Their office has changed. And if we don't understand that, then we really don't know how to set ourselves up for success with them. We need to talk about how much telemedicine they're doing, if they're doing telemedicine, and how has this impacted your business, et cetera. I think there's lots of things that you have to do differently, but frankly, many of our clients, especially the ones that are wildly successful because their products are so successful, have not figured that out yet.
Sure. Well, could you mention just a little bit about, that's a question that, how do you stay self-motivated? And I did see that you're starting a inner circle type of training, and
Yes.
kind of elaborate about that if you wouldn't mind.
Well, I get an awful lot of people who, call me and ask me for advice, and I just, one of my employees said, you ought to start an inner circle. Get 50 people, interact with them, over say a 90-day period of time. Talk to them 9 times, 3 times each month. Give them your phone number, give them your email. If they got a question, they can call you. And so I just do that to share my wisdom. I haven't even advertised it. I've already got 17 people signed up. I only want 50. Now, if I get more than 50, I might do 2 sessions. But look, here's what I believe. I'm one of the top sales experts in the world. I'm still looking to learn from other people. Jeremy Miner, this guy's brilliant. This guy's 25 years younger than I am. He's brilliant. Okay, I got a call with him tomorrow afternoon. and I'm asking him for his advice. So I think that the great salespeople, and what I say in the video that I recorded about the inner circle, this is not for anybody. This is for people who are serious about being great. See, I was serious about being great, but I was serious about being great because my father was bankrupt 3 times. My parents were married 9 times. My stepfather pulled a gun on me twice. We moved all the time because we couldn't pay the rent. My mother was drunk for 30 years. I did not want to be a failure. And I still don't want to be a failure. My success is driven by my fear of failure. And so I want people to have the opportunity that I had to learn from the people who had knowledge that I didn't have. And so that's why I'm doing the inner cycle. And I think if you want to be a great sales leader, the first thing you better do is learn how to teach selling, how to teach it, not how to do it, how to teach it. And how do you teach it is way different than how you do it. Now, if I teach it well, they'll do it well. But I still have to know, how do I get you to want to listen to me? If I ask everybody on this call right now, what are the 2 ways to get people to listen to you? I'll bet you I wouldn't get more than 60% of people that would give me the correct answer. And it's probably less than that. But I'm saying this, you can't teach or coach what you don't know. And if you look at what employees want from a supervisor, they want somebody who can give them competent job instruction. I used to tell my people, if you do what I tell you to do and you use your own authenticity, I guarantee your success. Guarantee. And I was 100% right. 19 out of the 20 people who stayed with me, 19 out of 19 who were with me longer than a month were A players because they did what I taught them to do. Now, where did I learn? I learned from the people I was working with. I learned from John Fuquay, the first person I hired. Van Walker, God rest his soul, died in 2017. He taught me more about customer excellence and focusing on the customer than anybody. And then what he did was he ignited in me this passion to learn more about it. And so I just want to provide an opportunity that people who want to learn from me can learn from, the wisdom that I've created. And also a big part of this is I want to learn from them. If I've got the right people, and I think that I will have the right people, because the people, 50 people willing to pay $600, which is $200 a month for 3 months to learn from me and have access to me. These are not going to be people that are not going to be A players. In fact, you ought to ask people, you in Acuff's inner circle? If you are, probably a pretty good idea that they got a growth mindset. They want to get better.
Sure.
So,
that's awesome.
That's basically, that's why I think you got to find people who are inveterate learners. You got to find people who have this desire that Kelly talked about to achieve and to succeed. And whether they're driven by winning or they're winning, or like me, they're driven by fear of losing. Now, by the way, fear of losing far stronger than wanting to win.
Good stuff. Yeah, in the military, they used to say the harder you fight, the harder it is to give up. And I truly believe when you're a student of sales, and that's what the career you chose for yourself, it's never ending, as you mentioned. But boy, it's such a rewarding profession, especially when you get really good at it.
Well, the other thing that happens too is if you're really good at this and you get old like I do, you actually have living examples of people that work for you that are millionaires. You have living examples of people who've had incredible lives, who've had phenomenal success and have children and grandchildren. And you look back and you say, I had a piece of that. I didn't have a big part of it, but I can tell you, the last time I was their manager was 1989. So what is that? 31 years ago. They want a reunion. Every single person that's alive, and they're all alive except for 2, want us to have a reunion. So I think it's unbelievable. Look, being a sales leader is the most rewarding thing that you can possibly do, because these people have entrusted you with their business life, which probably means they're going to spend more time with you or with your company or your products than they do with their family. And to me, that's a gigantic responsibility. And I believe if it's my responsibility, it's my responsibility to make sure that they are exceptional at what they do. And so if that means that I'm going to hire people from recruiters because I know they're going to give me good talent, I'm going to do it. That means if I'm going to interview in a certain way so I can identify whether you have that drive, if you have that sense of urgency, if you have that competitiveness, if you're a great communicator, I'm going to do that. But the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to model the behavior of a growth mindset.
Awesome. Well, I know we're going a little over here. Emily, the next slide is how do we get hold of Jerry if anybody wants to track him down to be in the inner circle or bring him in, as Barry kind of started off with. He's the best we've ever seen live. And so, Jerry, is that the easiest way to reach you?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way to reach me is, just to text me. Just say, hey, when are you free? 480-296-9972 is my mobile number. If you forget that, just go to jerryacuff.com. I'm the only one of the top 30 sales experts in the world that puts their phone number on their website. Now, by the way, nobody calls the damn thing, so which I don't understand, but I do put it on there. And if you just text me and say, hey, this is who I am, when are you free? I'll say, hey, this is when I'm free, and we'll connect. My email address is jacuff@deltapoint.com, which is real easy to remember. Also, I have lots of, I've got lots of YouTube videos. I have a virtual training program, that's focused on 4 things. How do you set and achieve stretch goal? If you go to jerryacuff.com, you can get that for free. It's everything I learned about how do you go from being a sales rep to running a company in 15 years, which you have to have stretch goals to do that. And I learned that from the book I read 93 times. I have the relationship edge in business, which is how do you build relationships with people you don't naturally connect with, and how do you leverage relationships with people in business who most people don't do a very good job of. And then I have the Superstar Sales Academy, and I have the Superstar Coaching Academy, and all of those things are available for purchase. And if you're interested in finding out how much they cost, don't pay attention to what's on the website. Just call me and I'll tell you. And if it depends on how many people that you have and, how generous I feel that day as to what we'll sell it for.
Awesome.
But I mean, Johnson & Johnson has 1,100 subscriptions of it. I take that as a pretty decent endorsement that it ain't bad.
Yeah. Well, and like I said, if you need to call us to track down Jerry, Jerry, I really appreciate really all your time, and everybody on this call. I appreciate your time. Hopefully, I know we didn't get to all your questions. I'll circle back with Jerry to see if I can get some of these answered for you. And then we'll probably be able to post this WebEx on our website, hopefully by tomorrow. And I really, from the bottom of my heart and my team, I really appreciate your time. If we can ever help you with recruiting needs or consultant needs, please call us anytime. And I appreciate Jerry.
Thanks, Jerry.
Thank you, Kelly.
Y'all take care.